Welcome to Flipped Video 13, Corruption Plagues the Nation. So for this one, we're going to analyze the issues of weak leadership and corruption in national politics in the 1870s through the 1890s. We're going to discuss civil service reform in the late 1800s, and we're going to assess the importance of economic issues in the late 1800s. So political power proves difficult to keep. So here we are. You're starting to see the expansion west. You're starting to see industries grow, right? So we're going back now to what's going on in the big cities. Now, if you remember from the movie Far and Away, we talked about the political boss there. He's the one that decided what jobs they got, where they lived. Well, this is the kind of stuff that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so while Congress enacted many major reforms during the Reconstruction, it passed very few measures between 1877 and 1900. Instead, inaction and corruption were serious political issues during the Gilded Age. All right, so this is during that laissez-faire time period, right? The hands-off policy. It raised questions whether or not democracy could succeed in a time dominated by large and powerful industrial corporations and men of great wealth. So men like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. So political corruption under President Grant. So Grant's presidency was marred by scandals, so he had some issues. Okay. Yes, he was this greatly loved president because he was a Civil War hero, okay? But he gave advisory posts to untrustworthy friends and acquaintances. So basically, he had other people handle his business, but they weren't the best guys, okay? So these advisors used their position to line their own pockets, all right? So, like they would give away contracts, like government contracts, and they would take some of the money for themselves. One of the big scandals was the Credit Mobilier scandal. It's a construction company that built the Union Pacific Railroad. They overcharged to give stock to 15 political leaders, including the vice president. And Grant looked away. Okay, so this is where they are giving this construction company a contract, but they're overcharging the company so that they can get the money themselves. And scandals like this are surfacing all over the countries, where city officials are selling construction contracts to friends and diverting money from the public accounts. One guy that's famous for this is Boss Tweed. Okay, he's a New York senator. He is in charge of the Tweed ring, and they plundered millions from the city's treasury. Okay, he was caught and he was sentenced to prison. And between President Grant and other city officials, scandals across the nation, the public's confidence in his leaders fell because they have guys like this Boss Tweed that are in charge. They see Grant just handing off his responsibilities, right? So they're starting to mistrust the government. They're like, well, look at what our cities are looking like. This hands-off policy is leading to all of this corruption. So it continues into subsequent administration. So presidents of the Gilded Age had a tendency to lack integrity. Rutherford B. Hayes was the Compromise of 1877. Benjamin Harrison lost the popular vote, but won the Electoral College. That's not unusual today, but that was the first time then. Chester Arthur took the presidency after President Garfield's assassination, and then he failed to win his party's nomination. So Chester Arthur was not very liked by his party. President Cleveland was the only exception of that. So Grover Cleveland was liked by his party. Okay, so here's super important, okay? So the spoils system right here. All right, very important. You want to know this. All right, so this is where politicians award government jobs to loyal party workers with little regard to their qualification. Andrew Jackson, our guy from our country, our state, he was the one who was the first to use this system. So basically what it is he says, here's the deal. If you vote for me, I'm going to promise you these jobs in the government, all right? And I don't care if you're qualified for the job. I'm going to go ahead and let you take it. No problems there, all right? Well, here's the problem. Parties were holding large rallies for these candidates, and they did not actually do any of the work that they promised to do. They just gave them these jobs, okay? So here again, we're starting to see where the government is not promoting a whole lot of confidence because they're giving jobs to people that don't qualify. Okay, so political machines. Developed by political parties, they reached into many cities in the nation. And in major cities, they were run by bosses or small groups of people. This is like the guy that had our guy from Far and Away fighting, okay? He was the one that was in charge. He was the boss, okay? Tammany Hall in New York City, Pendergast machine in Kansas City. These are two major machines, okay? They won over large groups of immigrants by promising solutions to problems like sanitation. They're like, hey, we're gonna fix these problems. We're, you know, like they did in the movie, they met them at the docks, right? They became friends. They provided a house for them, work for them, right? They got them into the factories to work. Okay, very similar here, okay? They played heavily on the spoil system, okay? So those that were loyal, those machines that were loyal to the party in power, they're the ones that got the jobs. And with voter loyalty, these machines often became really corrupt, okay? So the voters, they wanted solutions that were promised to them. Organization wanted the jobs promised to them, and often they bought the jobs, okay? So kind of an idea, okay? So Tammany Hall would pay the government, okay? And the government would tell Tammany Hall, okay, we're going to put you in these positions, okay, these positions of power. And with those positions of power, they were able to award contracts that would do, you know, construction, all right, or who would provide food for the government, that kind of stuff, okay? So they would overcharge those contracts, but because they owned those means, then they were able to put people into jobs, okay? So for the immigrants, it looked really good because they were able to get into jobs. So political cartoons alert the public. Boss of the Senate is the most famous one. This is one that you're going to see in the Nearpod and we'll go over in class. All right? Thomas Nast, he's the guy that wrote that cartoon, and he did a lot more of them. So he created a series of cartoons that exposed the illegal activities of Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall. His work got Boss Tweed arrested in Spain. This gives you an idea of the corruption that grew. So you should definitely pause this, take a look at some of these numbers. It grew exponentially, okay? So here's your voter turnout, all right? All the way through Woodrow Wilson. So civil service reform efforts, okay? So it took the 1881 assassination of James Garfield to make reform a reality. Charles Gatineau shot the president because he believed the Republican Party had not fulfilled their promise to give him a government job. Okay, so they didn't do the spoil system for him. All right, so in response to the corruption of the spoil system, a number of prominent figures promoted civil service reform. All right, and that's basically a fancy word that says you need to be qualified for the job. All right, so this system included federal jobs in the executive branch. All right, so most government workers would get their jobs due to their expertise and maintain them regardless of what party was affiliated. Okay, very big deal. Okay, so these jobs are no longer like gifts. And here's the Pendleton Civil Service Act. Okay, so Chester Arthur became president after Garfield's assassination. Arthur signed the act in 1883, and it established the Civil Service Commission. Okay, and they established the civil service exam. So you have to pass a test now to get these jobs, okay? Individuals who wanted to work for the government, you have to take the exam. If you did well on the exam, you could get the job, okay? And economic policies are starting to change, are continuing to change, all right? So public discontent is worsened by economic turmoil and uncertainty. Remember that huge gap, you know, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. In the fall of 1873, one of the nation's most influential banks failed. apparently as a result of overextended loans to the expanding railroad industry. So remember I told you, railroads were really, really risky at the time. All right, and here's a bank that failed because of it. And then at the same time, you have a panic of 1873 that spreads through the financial industry and across the nation. Bank failures, job losses, and uncertain economy added to the array of the nation's concerns. All right, so we're starting to see some cracks. All right, so remember, gilded is covered in gold but corrupt on the inside. So on the outside, everything looks great, but now we're starting to see underneath that gilting, okay? So events such as these prompted political leaders to debate the best way to keep the economy moving forward. So how can we salvage this economy? They started with the gold standard, all right? So the government, prior to this, would use gold as the basis of the nation's currency, okay? Paper money was backed by the nation's gold reserve. Money would not be printed unless there was gold. Today's currency is not backed by gold, and therefore the government is able to print more money, right? So that's how we're, these trillions of dollars that we're putting out for all these bailouts, you know, they're because we're printing more money, okay? Because we're no longer on the gold standard. So during the Civil War, the government issued greenbacks, or money that was not backed by the gold standard. That was called fiat money, money backed by the government who printed it. Okay, so this is really, really important because this is the standard that we are on today. All right, we are on fiat currency. All right, our government says our money is worth something. Okay, after the war, the greenbacks contributed to inflation, so the government retired them. Okay, so inflation is when money is not worth as much, so it costs more to pay for something. Okay, so you're starting to see this happen in gas. It's usually kind of the first thing that'll reflect inflation. Gas prices go up. You can't get the same amount of gas for the same amount of money anymore. So greenbacks were kind of causing that inflation, so they retired it and they went back to the gold standard. Well, in 1873, Congress passed the Coinage Act, and it reversed the government's policy backing money with gold or silver. All right, the biggest risk of fiat currency is that governments can print as much money as they want and create hyperinflation. And that's one of the things that we're kind of worried about right now is hyperinflation, because we're having to print so much money. So this is something that they were looking at this time. So in 1873, they passed the Coinage Act, okay? So we're starting to go back to fiat currency slowly in 1873. They're trying to right the ship, all right? So we'll talk a little bit more about this in class,